Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer. I'm your host, Sarah Bueno. I'm a psychotherapist, teacher, consultant, and most importantly, a wounded healer, living and working in Skokie, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. This is a space for thought-provoking, unscripted conversations with people from all walks of life, united by the shared mission of healing ourselves while promoting healing in the world around us. Whether you're here to find inspiration, learn, or simply feel seen, you're invited on this journey of healing from the individual to the collective. Thanks for joining me. Hello, friends. Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer. I am Sarah Bueno, your host. And if you are hearing a little less enthusiasm in my voice today, it has nothing to do with the guest. It's really just sort of where I am as I'm recording this and where things are at the world in this current moment. So, where I am right now is it is the end of September, and it's been about a week and a half since there was a really horrific shooting. And isn't it kind of ridiculous that I might name this and you may be like, which shooting? Which one is she talking about? But that's like the state of how things are in America right now. And I just want to note that I record some of these pretty far in advance. And so that's why I generally have made the decision to not be quite as timely in my intros because I record them so far in advance. And I'm certainly not trying to shy away from talking about political topics or hard topics or grapple with any of the things. I hope that you hear in all these episodes, I'm continuing to grapple as much as possible. But because unprecedented events are just rolling out at a just ridiculous pace, there's no way for me to be able to keep up with all of the things. However, since this is a really painful period of time for a lot of people, I just wanted to remind us that our personal power, our connection with our own agency, our embodiment of our values, all of those things are so crucial right now. Absolutely crucial. I believe we're not going to get through this time unless we figure out ways to get through it together, especially with people that we don't agree with. And while I certainly don't condone any violent actions, I don't condone any hatred, we're going to need to learn how to work with people that we feel differently with, especially therapists. So if you're listening to this, my call to you as a therapist is, what can you do to maintain connection to your personal power as much as possible? Of course, you'll go in and out of capacity. You'll go in and out of your ability to be flexible and resilient towards the given moment at any time. But we've got to have our personal power on board right now. So, couple people that I have been listening to. I've got a little list together because I don't have all the answers. I don't think anybody really has all of the answers that we have right now, but I want to just tell you some folks that I am listening to if it is helpful. So Noam Chomsky is somebody I listen to, Lama Rod Owens, Resmaa Menakem, Friedhof Capra, Ian McGilchrist. I listen to the Pod Save America Crooked Media podcasts. I am joining the group Braver Angels, which is an organization that is intending to use therapy skills to bridge the divide between the left and right in America. I'm doing everything I can to stay connected to what's happening right now in a way that I still feel connected to my agency, and I hope that everyone can do that too. So all that being said, this episode with today's guest is such a treasure. And if you are in any sort of leadership position in the therapy world, I really hope you're listening to this convo. Share it with any friends who are in leadership, because my guest today is Julianne Guinasso. And Julianne and I are both Enneagram 3s. And what was so interesting to me about this conversation is, as I was listening to it, I was starting to listen with my, I'm digging in more to the Enneagram now, sort of listening with that Enneagram ear, and just hearing about the similar ways that Julianne and I want to lead from the heart and really be honest and intentional and put everything on the table with teams in order to build trust. It was so funny as I was hearing her talk. I'm like, that's exactly how I ran my practice. Oh my God, we were so in this together. So, one of the things we start out with is really this question of what does it mean to be a therapist today? We recorded this, I think, over a month ago now. And yet, this is a question that we're all grappling with. And another piece is how we see the world based on what our identity as a therapist means. What does it mean to embody our values? How humility can really sneak up on you if you're not paying attention. Julianne and I are both reading the same books, Inner Work of Racial Justice by Rhonda McGee and Calling In by Loretta Ross. And she talks about how important it is to learn about being a good leader from your team, that's one of the best pieces of information that you can use are things that your team tell you. And then we talk about the updates that we see being needed in the field overall, leadership, and within our organizations. So, couple other things I want to tell you about before I give you Julianne's bio is I'm going to be running my Authentic Leaders Group in 2026. February of 2026 is when we're starting. So if you are a person who is in any sort of leadership role in your organization, this will be my third round of Authentic Leaders. And it's a space where therapist leaders can explore their leadership journey with honesty, courage, and support of others. And you can go to headheartbiztherapy.com/authentic leaders group to join. And if you join our Authentic Leaders Group for this round, you get a free year membership to Group Practice Revolution as well. So please go to headheartbiztherapy.com/authentic-leaders-group to join us. And one other thing, I'm excited that I have a new partnership, and the podcast is now sponsored by the Therapist Network. So the Therapist Network is really freaking cool. It's a community that's built by therapists for therapists, and doesn't matter if you're pre-licensed or you've been in the field for a long time or somewhere in between. If you've been longing for more connection or you're feeling overwhelmed or isolated, this is a great place for you. And they have live consult groups, library of workshops and courses, and my consult group, which I have run one of now so far as I'm recording this, Tending to the Wounded Healer. So that's where we're going to explore the intersection of our lived experience and our clinical work, which is exactly what we do on this podcast too. So if you want to join me there, it meets every other Monday from 1 to 2 p.m. Central Time. So if you want to find out more, you can go to thetherapist.network. And if you're ready to just sign up right now and join, you can join me in my consult group at tinyurl.com/healer consult TTN. That's tinyurl.com/healer consult TTN. So now, without further ado, let me tell you about Julianne. Julianne Guinasso is a licensed marriage and family therapist in private practice and also the co-founder of Level Up Leaders, Inc., where she partners with Poonam Natha, who will also be on the podcast very soon, to support group practice owners in cultivating psychological safety through trauma-informed leadership. With over a decade of leadership experience, she helps practice owners move beyond performative policies to tend their relational ecosystems, creating collaborative cultures that reclaim joy and sustain vision. So please enjoy my wonderful, heartful, soul-filling conversation with Julianne Guinasso. Julianne, welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and say your last name because I don't even know if I've ever heard it pronounced.
Guinasso.
Guinasso.
Yeah,
Love
so if we go that far, we're gonna say Guinasso, but Guinasso.
Guinasso.
Yeah, but
Okay.
Guinasso is totally appropriate and great, and yeah.
Right, we're not Alex Trebek. Let's not get fancy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I am I'm so excited to talk to you because we've gotten to know each other. And the more I get to know you and Poonam, who we'll
Mhm.
also have on the podcast, the more I love you and feel like we are heart sisters. And so I
Mm.
just couldn't be happier to share an hour with you.
Yeah, very values aligned. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, do you want to tell people a little bit about your journey?
Mhm.
I'd love kind of your therapist origin story and then sort of how you went through therapisting to what you're doing now, too.
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, so I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and the origin story is like every probably therapist origin story, which is I guess oddly, I think it was around like 10 years old that I was like, I'm gonna become a therapist, which
Hmm.
offers a lot of questions and
Right,
curiosities
right.
around that.
Yeah. Like, what was
Like,
going on there?
uh-huh. Like, I remember, like, key moments in, like, even, like, normal development, like high school, where I would think, like, "Do I wanna do this, or would this jeopardize my ability to be a therapist?" Like, I took
Oh,
it way,
wow.
way too serious, way too early, but it felt at the time, which I think, in any capitalist society, right? You have the, like, "What are you gonna be when you're older, and how are you gonna contribute to society?" And I think that that merged with the fact that I come from families who do a lot of service oriented work, and so it was definitely
Mm,
about the, like, how am I going to show up and be of service, and what does that look like uniquely for me? And so I think part of that was nurture, part of it was nature. I think I have a type of energy where even before I had formally identified that therapist role, I feel like people naturally would come up to me and share things, and I think a lot of therapists can relate to this, right? I've never told anyone this before, or
mhm,
I'm actually thinking that I don't want to be living anymore. And like
mhm.
me being like, oh, wow, I'm like 13 and needing to figure out how to tell an adult that I'm having this conversation with, like, peers, right? Not from my own
Right.
story, but like from people coming up to me and like experiencing those feelings. And so I just think over time it was like, oh yeah, maybe there's something here, but it became my identity super early on, which is interesting, and also interesting because although I still practice therapy, it is not like the main thing that I found myself doing. But I do remember being in grad school and hearing about all the different, avenues one can go as a therapist. And I even remember turning to one of my colleagues or peers at the time and was like, who would go through all this to like then not be a full-time
Yeah,
therapist? Like, who
right.
are those people?
Right. Why would you ever?
Yeah, doesn't make any sense. And then here we
Yeah.
are. So,
Mhm.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like there's probably so many things I missed over, but as far as like a overall gist, that's kind of like
Yeah.
the journey and the way it went.
Let's unpack because this is so up for me right now. So let me see if I can say some things. I'm having a really hard time being clear. So please let me know if I have not drawn a straight enough line.
Mhm.
But one of the things that I feel like I'm starting to understand on a deeper level is that the field of therapy is not the end all be all.
Mhm.
And, I can say that and it's like, well, duh. But, hearing you say that when you were a kid, you were thinking like, oh, is this going to jeopardize my ability to be a therapist? If I had really known it at a young age, I probably would have been saying that same thing too, because like I put the field of therapy all the way up here. And to be a therapist means you are in the utmost integrity. You are
Mhm.
really thinking about how other people perceive you and how you're coming across. And like you always have to be, some sort of helper and like model citizen or something.
Like not
And
human.
yeah, well, it's funny because it's like it brain-wise, no, but there's just like there was like this internal rigid expectation,
Mhm. Mhm.
and it's been shattered now, and what I'm realizing is just how much that rigid expectation has been keeping me in a state of judgment of both myself and of others.
Mm.
And so I'm curious for you, like, what is your relationship with being a therapist?
Ooh, such a good question.
Yeah.
So I have two simultaneous thoughts. One is I was recently at jury duty and their intro video showed a
Mm,
therapist um who was selected to be a juror, and how the therapist was really happy to be in this process and going through the motions. And in that moment, I just remember
right.
thinking like, oh, this is where right now as a society we are putting therapists on a pedestal, which we know that that has been, but it has is felt like even more sort of a pendulum swing of happening, which we know the pendulum
Yeah.
swing will come back, right? It's going to have to even out,
Eh, eh.
right? The reckoning's coming. And
Yep.
so I think so. Holding that when you said that, I was like, oh yeah, the society and the way that we have put, it's almost like we swapped out the way religion had impact on our society, which
Yes.
obviously it still does and is
Yes.
that's also very influential, but it's almost like that was replaced by the process of therapy, right? And so when I think of like community oriented, it's like we've replaced the community of churches for what is it
Yes.
that the therapist is going to like have the ultimate say or share. And so it's interesting to just see all those dynamics kind of at play. And so all to say, I feel like I've gone through definitely a decolonized approach where there was even a moment where I was like, do I even see myself as a therapist anymore? And this is when I was pausing
Yes.
actually having my own caseload and was fully in leadership. I had a bunch of employees. I was totally loving work culture. We were providing therapy services. So I was still so connected, but yet felt still so removed. And so I had a moment of like, where do I see myself? And when I get back into the therapy room, which now I have been for since 2021, what is that going to be like to kind of re-enter the therapy space? So it's, in some ways I was never disconnected, right? When I was training staff, I was going to their assessments or certain like
Mhm.
sessions. So it's like I was still always involved, but feeling that removal when it's not your direct caseload. And so I remember just thinking like, how do I integrate all the things I've learned about myself or even learned in my own personal
Mhm.
identity and actually come back to this space? Seeing the concerns I see within our field, wanting to show up differently and trying to like fit that on, which is like an interesting process to kind of go through. So I feel like I think, when you start deconstructing any of your identities, you just start to deconstruct every system and every identity you've ever held. And it's almost like you don't stop. It's like the
Mhm.
the onion layer just keeps peeling, and you either find another system that you
Yeah.
haven't conceptualized in a new way, or another belief that you were like, oh shoot, I didn't realize this also was having like impact or uh, clouding the lens in which I was like viewing life and the way I was moving through the world. And so I
Yes.
think it's just been like an entirely new process of like, how do I still harness those clinical skills that felt good when I was full-time therapist, and then how do I integrate these new aspects of myself, of my belief system, and like even the ways that I want to show up in our field to help change our field. And I feel like I've
Yes.
always been someone who wants to stay within systems to change them versus decide to totally pivot away. No right or wrong
Yeah.
there, but I just think that's typically been something that I felt lit up by, of like, yeah, let's build a new, let's like do this imperfectly and messy, but like let's just make this a new process.
This is why we're friends, because literally everything you just said makes so much sense, and it is exactly how I've always thought too. I remember telling somebody once, like, "Oh, you're the type of person who wants to burn down the building. I'm the type of person who wants to go inside and infiltrate and, like, I
Yes.
wanna be the mole
Yes.
in the system and, like, change it from there." And I think both are needed, and I think this is part
Mhm.
of, I mean, at least from what I'm seeing, I think this is part of the issues in the therapy field in general, is that we're seeing, because as we're getting to know more about what it means to decolonialize something, which is inherently colonial, let's just say, right? Like a white
Mhm.
person coming in and, like,
Mhm.
social work anyway, white people coming in and being like, "Oh, you poor people of color, let me help
Mhm.
you show the right way."
Mhm.
That's the dirty
Yeah,
underbelly of social work, but, like,
absolutely.
um yes, I was like, where was I? So what does that mean, right? And I think
Mhm.
in since 2020, it's not that this was not happening before 2020, but something catalyzed George Floyd's murder, right? Among other
Yep.
things, catalyzed a lot of decolonizing voices, and there were a lot more trainings. Like my friend Sarah Suzuki and I were getting booked all the time for speaking gigs about, anti-racism work. And we taught a lot of language, but we didn't really teach embodiment. And I'm
Hmm.
I'm not just saying me and Sarah. I mean, we were certainly trying
As
to
a
do that as much as
collective.
we could as a
Mhm.
collective, right? And I
Mhm. Mhm.
know, like, the people that I've been following have been trying to teach embodiment. So maybe we were teaching embodiment, but embodiment wasn't landing. Like, because I hear stories about practices that are checking
Mhm.
the box
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
being
Mhm.
an anti-racist practice,
Mhm.
but that's not how it ends up manifesting. And so it feels to me like we know the language, we know the right things to say, but if we don't start embodying this, right?
Yeah.
Because, like, people can say the word abundance, but if all you're doing is acting in a way that it feels like you're not going to get enough clients, then you don't live in abundance. And it's not
Mhm.
like you can't have scarcity thoughts or feelings and live in abundance, but, like, if most of your actions are in scarcity, you're not embodying it.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I feel like it's as soon as you think that it's an arrival, um,
Yes.
then you might find yourself, causing more unintentional harm than you intend to, because I think even when
Yes.
you're actively practicing, you're gonna cause harm, right? Like, and I mean
Yes.
this collectively for everyone,
Yes.
right? And so,
Mhm.
like, I think for me, the question I always ask myself is how do I make this into a practice, and how can I
Yes.
ritualize, what this
Mm.
is? Because anytime, and this is the beauty of, like, humility. Humility will find you anytime it needs to, at least in my experience, and so
Yeah, yep.
anytime I think there's, like, an arrival, anything, in any
Mhm.
context, there will be something that will, humble me quick
Mhm.
and remind me that, like, "No, nope, imperfect human here, and it's gonna be
Yeah.
messy at times," and the whole process is to adopt that it is a practice. There will
Yeah.
always be that new layer of understanding, a new layer of understanding my privilege or my impact, or, um, uh, just getting more exposure of, like, what that looks like, since there's not, like, a monolith of experience, and everything is
Right.
so within that intersectional dimension of, like, how do we as humans interact? How do we stay in relationship with each other, when there's
Right.
rupture? Because we're gonna be messy and human and beautiful and have opinions, and it's not gonna always line up. And so how do we
Right.
really stay in connection, and in relationship, and really learn through that instead of, shy away from it, which
Yeah.
takes a lot of obviously emotional energy and bandwidth. And it's not like a full on all the time, but, like, how do we, if it's like a ritual, there's a rhythm to it. And I think if it's a
Yeah.
practice, it's something that feels a little more sustainable.
What do you think your entry point was for really treasuring? I see you as treasuring doing the work.
Mm,
Like, not
mm.
not treasuring and like, "Oh, this is fun all the time," because it is fucking painful and heartbreaking and
So much
scary
grief.
and so
Mhm,
much grief, right?
mhm,
But I think this is, again, another reason we get along is because we're both voraciously seeking healing
mhm,
and integrity.
mhm,
What And I don't know that I have an answer to this question, so feel free to
mhm.
just think out loud, but, like, was there an entry point? Is there something that really drew you to that period? Sorry, I was like, "Did I have more to say?" No.
Question complete.
Mhm.
I have, like, several different, I have 2 things that show up for me. I think one is a resource and one is an experience. And so
Mm.
in resource-wise, I'll actually go with that first. There's a book, The Inner Work of Social Justice by Rhonda McGee, and
Right there.
nice. Yep.
Yep.
And that book is what I think made everything, like, lock into place for me
Mm.
to understand that it is a practice and a process. And I
Mhm.
think she connected for me all my therapy skills that I could do now in
Mm.
any, like, social justice landscape, right? Because if
Yeah.
all of a sudden you can become aware of your internal experience, then now I can see anytime I resist truth, anytime I
Yes.
resist ways in which I've internalized white supremacy or am practicing it or like,
Yes.
living it out or not being aware of my privilege or not naming all these things. And so it was like, "Oh, what is that sensation I feel literally inside that tells me that I'm closing off or responding?" I maybe I see a post, and maybe it's calling out white supremacy behavior. If I have a response to that, then, ooh, now I feel like, I don't wanna say I get excited, that sounds actually weird and not quite exactly the the sensation, but I think it leans
Mhm.
into curiosity, and I think curiosity
Yeah.
is interesting and exciting because it's like, "Ooh,
Yep.
what part of me do I not yet know?" Whether
Yeah.
this is a collective part I've internalized, like, from a shadow perspective, is this something that, like, I have inherently done and not realized that I have to now take accountability for? And so
Mhm.
I just think it just allowed me to touch base with what those sensations were. So openness and curiosity were actually possible. Because I think before I've always been a curious nature, but I think it wasn't until that book that I was really able to tap it into my internal process to actually stay open and
Mm.
curious enough to make contact with how painful that realization can be. And I also
Yeah.
realize for some folks listening, hearing two white women talk about how painful it is to make content, right? Like I'm
Yeah.
aware of like, yeah, well, how painful that
Yep.
must be to actually live it versus like learn about it. And that actually
Right.
leads me into my first experience, which is me learning about it versus having lived it. In grad school, I was so lucky. I was placed in a group where I was the only white woman. Everyone
Mm.
else there was of a different ethnicity, and several of them were not actually born in the States. And so we just
Mm.
had this really consistently enriching conversation about lived experiences. And that whole class was on lived experiences. And so
Mm.
I just feel like we had trust, in this group, but I just think I had, like, such a privilege of hearing story after story after story in ways that just made me absolutely radically rethink what it's like to
Mm.
move through the world based on identity in a way that I just didn't have access to before.
Yeah.
And so that really, I think, shifted oh, I'm a white body moving through space. There's so many systems that I am not aware of because they center my comfort that I just didn't even consider. And so hearing that from people I respected and enjoyed, it just, yeah. And also they were so kind to me, right? And I think
Mm.
I've been given so much grace in my like learning, and I think it's because it's
Mhm.
come through real relationships, right? If a relationship is truly
Yes.
reciprocal,
Yes.
then there's that reciprocity in both ways. And so I've been lucky to have people in my life who have been willing to sit with me even in my moments of like complete ignorance or harm, and be able to share like, let me share how this maybe impacted me in the
Yeah.
context of our relationship. And I think for me, of course, I have the marriage and family therapy lens, but I'm like, everything is relational to me. I see everything through that systemic lens. And so I see how much I was transformed in my relationships, and then how much that allowed me to be open enough to even probably have that book come across my radar and actually be open to it. And I actually
Yeah.
heard Rhonda McGee on a podcast. So that's how I learned about her book. And I don't recall the podcast,
I did
but
too.
did
Was it
you?
Pete Holmes' podcast?
Oh, I
She was
don't
probably doing a
believe
tour. Okay.
probably,
Yeah.
but her story is actually what resonated with me because she became disillusioned with the legal system herself, and so when she went actually to her therapist, and she talks about how she had this conversation with her therapist of, "Do I leave?"
Yeah.
And her therapist was like, "Or do you transform? And which one it actually
Yeah.
lights you up?" And she chose the, like, "I wanna stay and transform my industry versus leave it, now that I've
Yeah.
become disillusioned with it." And that was the moment where I was like, "Oh, I just resonate with that so much as an individual," and then introduced me to her work, and yeah. I feel like the journey just kind of like unfolded from there.
Yeah. Where did you go to school?
At Loma Linda University, so I'm based in
Mm.
Southern California.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I am curious about, as we try to transform the field, probably the last thing to transform is gonna be academia, and so I'm
Mm,
super curious about, like, how our training is preparing students for the world that we live in now, instead of the
mhm.
world that you and I were trained
Right.
to work in, you know? I mean, the biggest difference being we are all going through a collective trauma at the same
Yep.
time, and that's not what we were trained for. We were trained to, even though we were told like, "Oh, yeah, you're walking alongside your client." No, 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 we are the ones that have the knowledge, and the clients come to us, and we have ways to
Mhm.
help them feel better, but now we are also not okay.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I don't know yet what that looks like other than doing your own work, and so I'm just
Mhm.
always super intrigued by programs that were not forcing is not the right word, but inviting that internal reflection, because that is not the education I received.
Yeah, I do feel like in that way, I was very fortunate to have a very diverse intersection of professors and conversations, and even people, the makeup of our class. I think that did allow for still not enough, right? Like, I still feel like there was definitely elephants in the room, like, "Oh, why is it that we're always, specifically learning about methodologies that come from a specific demographic," right? And,
Right.
but there definitely was still, like, a lot of emphasis on, yeah, like, how do we bring the whole person into the therapy room truly, and what does that mean from a biopsychosocial lens, which I know in our field we all get, but truly, how do we embody that, and how do we actually conceptualize something beyond just some of these specific modalities. Mhm.
Yeah. Well, and in what ways are you finding yourself, like, finding your entry point into the transformation of the field? Which ways are you trying to do that right now?
Yeah, so leadership is really the thing that I unintentionally fell into and fell in love with. I had a series of, harmful experiences as a clinician. And I watched a lot of my peers go through harmful situations. A lot of people think like they should leave the field or that they weren't cut out for
Mhm.
it based on just like some of their experiences, not so much with clients, but with administration. And so when I unintentionally became a leader, I went into it feeling like, oh, I could do something different and I could do something better, and felt like really charged up and excited to do it. But then here's like the humility part again. And then
Mhm.
humility
Yep.
came, and I was like, wow, this is a lot fucking harder than I thought it was. And I really truly then offered so much compassion for any former boss supervisor that I had previously. And of course, I had some that were really beautiful in my development that I'm still grateful to for this day. But even the ones that I felt like I had a lot of difficult or harmful moments with, I was still able to truly offer so much grace and compassion because I was like, I
Mhm.
didn't actually get how hard this was. And even
Yeah.
though I feel like I'd have feedback for them,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
I still now get this from a way that I didn't get this before. And I still want to do different and better if I can. And so I still felt like this determination of like, I still want to I still believe there is a way to do this. Like, yes,
Yeah.
we're clear about the systems we are currently living and working in. We're way more aware of the harm. We're having more day-to-day conversations acknowledging it when we can, and we still have to show up I still have to show up today and like function within these systems, right? And so
Right.
I still felt very motivated to be like, how can we do things different? And so in that case, this is like the story of like Punam and I. We happened to be office neighbors, and we were both the seventh. We had two different teams, and we were both the seventh supervisor in the context of a 1 year period for our teams. So to say they did not have they were taking bets, Sarah, on like when I was going to leave, which of course,
Hilarious.
a seventh supervisor, of course they were taking bets, right? And so
That's
luckily
so
her and
funny.
I had each other, and we both right away found out how quickly we actually aligned in our beliefs around the we take care of our people, and they're going to be able to take care of our communities, right? They're like,
Yep.
there's no way that their clinical work won't improve. There's no way that their work-life balance won't
Yep.
improve. And so we had to do that with the support of each other, but we also had to learn how hard it was and make a lot of mistakes. So by no means did we do it perfectly. And if I really reflect back on that time, after I got over that initial hub with my team not trusting me, when we finally were able to establish trust with each other, I realized how much I actually learned from them, what it
Yes.
means to actually be a good leader. And so how much they were willing to be a part of that co-creation in a way that if I had gotten a different team, A, maybe I would have never continued my leadership journey.
Mm.
Or B, I wouldn't have gotten clarity on how impactful it is when you bring your team into the culture. And so there were a lot of things that Poonam and I were doing that we couldn't maybe give voice to the way we do now, because we like, okay, what happened? How did this work after,
Yeah.
like, again, after lots of mistakes flying in our face,
Yep.
crying in each other's offices, thinking like I can't do, all the things, right? Like nothing makes you connect to your parts than being a leader. Like nothing to me, and
Parenting probably, but
yeah,
we don't know
and
that.
neither of us do. Poonam would say even more than parenting. She would say that, and her
Really?
role as a
Wow.
mother is so sacred to her. But she would say, nope, leadership, even,
Mhm.
and I'm sure for everyone it's a unique experience. But yeah, it just really makes you have access to all your parts if you want to be a conscious leader. I think
Right.
I get why so often people go into leadership and at some point close off their heart,
Yeah.
because it is so vulnerable and you don't realize the level of projections and scrutiny and misunderstandings that is like
Yep.
constantly happening. And so it is very tempting to want to close off and to not want to hear and to not want to have hard conversations. And that is a route one can go, but I think that manifests in a lot of other like pain points eventually, right? And so
Yep.
it's like, how do I stay open hearted and actually move through these hard conversations? And again, when I reflect back, I just realized like how much of that at the time was due to the fact that I had a team who was so ready to have a leader who could meet them. And
Mm.
we really developed a reciprocity that was like appropriate, but really showed what it means to co-create culture, and like what does that mean when people get to actually have a voice and what that looks like. Doesn't mean they're necessarily like setting the expectations of some of the things that they needed to do, right? But
Right.
it did mean they had such a voice and influence in the way we showed up in space together, how we showed up in space together, what relationships looked like, how we supported each other. And so to see that kind of like grow and blossom, um, our contracts grew, our clinical
Mhm.
results definitely showed an increase, our retention was kind of like unheard of, and then our programs like tripled. And so over time, it was just like, wow, there's something here that feels really special.
Yep.
And it's not just because like Poonam and I were just like,
Right.
right, it was not just like an us thing.
Yep.
We always knew it was like a we thing. There was never a moment where we did not feel
Yep.
that so strongly that at any point any of these folks can opt out and not accept the invitation that we're offering, and we have no control over that. And sometimes people did, right? Sometimes people did not want to meet us, or
Yeah.
did not want to maybe grow or maybe be a part of the culture. And it was just always a reminder in those moments that it was always an active choice of whether or not people actually wanted to like co-create and meet us in culture or
Right.
not. It was a really
Yeah.
long answer, but
Well, no, no, and I mean, that's sort of what I was thinking along the lines of, the field needing to update itself in order to meet the clients that we're meeting right now and the times that we have right now. I also
Mhm.
think leadership needs to change or respond differently, or maybe it's organizations. I don't know. That's what we're trying to figure out in group practice revolution. But right now, a lot of what I'm hearing from my leaders that I'm working with is that team members are not interested in co-creating. There's
Mhm,
just so much anger right now and
mhm,
distrust of authority and anger at
mhm.
authority. There's a lot more confrontation and judgment. So yeah, I'm curious how you're supporting the leaders in your programs with that very now piece.
Yeah. I think we have to easier said than done and without, like, all the context of every practice, of course, but
Right.
I would say lean into the conversations.
Yeah.
Actually go into space saying consistently, "I am aware of leadership. I'm aware of the harm that's in our industry. First and foremost, I don't want you all to think that I'm not aware.
Yeah.
I'm aware of harmful systems that continue to contribute to all of our feelings of well-being, our safety and security. And here's how I want to show up differently with you all, but I'm going to not do it perfectly and I am going to make mistakes. Here's the part that know that's mine to own, and here's the part where I really see you get to contribute. And
Yeah.
then I think it's being really clear with them, what are those ways? And here's the way that I am inviting you into this conversation consistently. And I think it's then knowing that we never stop that conversation. So you're having this conversation basically
Right.
every week, if not every day. And I mean, not to a place where they're like rolling their eyes, like we get it, like we get
Right.
that, fantastic. But like a in a
Right.
in a way of like it's a continual, again, practice. It's a continual conversation. We have to
Yeah.
consistently revisit it and let them know, here's how I'm attempting to do things different. And here are sometimes my limitations. And I think sometimes, I know that's not the now, but like when I reflect back to really hard moments where I felt stuck, where I had I had no choice but to move forward on something. It was definitely like a, here's what we need to do. Here's the why.
Yep.
Here's the parts that I don't like, and if I was you, here's what I would be thinking and saying. And so sometimes
Yep.
it's even saying those things out loud. If I was
Yeah.
you, this is what I would be feeling. If I was you, this is what I'd be thinking. And the truth is
Mhm.
I could easily access that because as an employee, I did have a lot of thoughts and feelings and opinions.
Mhm.
I didn't always know how to voice those appropriately, but they were there. And so I
Yeah.
think I was able to like just name the part that like just because I am authority doesn't mean I just automatically am going to earn your respect or trust.
Yep.
And this is a relationship, and which means it is bidirectional and it does need to go both ways. And so if we don't always consistently talk about the relationship and talk about that reciprocity in, again, showing up and in creating space, then this is going to feel transactional.
Mhm.
And so if I am clear on the values of our culture and I don't want a transactional culture, then I'm going to be spelling out what those values are, and not just words on a wall, but I'm
Right.
actually going to have us have a conversation of what this would look like in practice. So, for
Yeah.
example, if I really wanted, I talked about curiosity earlier today. If I knew that was something I really wanted to see in practice, I would have ongoing conversations with my folks. What does curiosity look like when we're actually practicing it, when we're in space
Yep.
together? How would you know if I'm not using curiosity? What are my tells?
Yes.
Tell me what you
Yes.
see, and then vice versa. What are your tells? What would tell me
Yes.
that maybe curiosity doesn't feel accessible to you right now? And then like how do we name that? And how do we invite it to come back into space? And like what's language that doesn't feel like clinical or pathologizing, but allows us to access our skills of being in relationship, of being therapists? How do we access those skills but in an appropriate way to
Mhm.
name when something's not in the room and to see if it can be accessible to bring back?
And I think the piece that often is missing, at least that I see, is self-accountability on
Mhm.
both the practice owner and the employee or, who leader or whatever.
Totally.
And this is the complaint that I hear from employees most often is that like, my boss says XYZ thing, but then I see this other thing and they don't necessarily know all of the other stuff that's going on. And because we're in a culture right now that is demanding authenticity and
Mm.
transparency, it's such a balance because I always think of like, the analogy of like if a family is struggling to pay the bills, you don't tell your kid, "Oh, we're struggling to pay the bills," because they don't have enough of the big picture to like hold that and they might freak out or whatever. But it's important
Mm.
for the kid to know something because they feel that something's happening. So I think that with practice ownership too, um, if there's going to be something that's impacting everyone that they are going to feel, they're going to need to know something about it. And how can you like I don't want to use the word developmental because this is not a developmental thing, but like from their vantage point, that gives them enough information that they can better understand, but it doesn't scare the shit out of them for no reason.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah. I mean, instantly, would go to like our leadership model and like the way that we would like direct folks to kind of like move through this, right? And so if I'm pulling
Yeah.
on one of the elements, the way that we would walk people through this is to really first get clear on like, okay, so say you need to share something with your folks and you're like, they're definitely not going to be okay with this. So first thing that we would walk folks through is like, well, how is it that you would want them to experience this message? We know you can't
Mhm.
predict or control, but how would you want them to experience it? So for some folks,
Mhm.
they might say, well, I want them to know this was maybe like a hard decision, but that I'm in it with them. Or they might say, I want them to know that this initially might feel hard, but here's all the outcomes or benefits I know it will provide for us and specifically for them long term. Or I want them to feel like excited by this or to know that this is something that I'm really looking forward to, whatever. Or maybe it's even, I want them to know this is serious. And actually, if we don't
Mhm.
address this, here are the long term implications. So it's first getting really clear on that. And then it's getting clear on, like, to your point, the why. Why is this happening? And I think the more concrete we can be here, the more helpful it is for the employee to have the information they need. And I think
Yeah.
when you start to feel like you're justifying what you did, that's an indication that maybe you're going
Yes.
into, right? That's not helpful for them. They're just going to
Yep.
hear the justification and then write everything else you say off.
Yep.
So,
They'll hear it
what
as
is
excuses. Yeah.
uh-huh, exactly. So what's the true why? What's the purpose? What does this mean for me? How does this impact my job? How do I understand this is truly in our best interest? And how do I
Mhm.
also sometimes as the leader, and this kind of goes into our next area, which is acknowledging like who you're speaking to, like which of your employees, what their positions are, and how you need to like name their obstacles, struggles, identities, or lived experiences. But in that in between, you're really needing to acknowledge the if this is why we need to do this, I want to name that sometimes the why is going to benefit you personally, and sometimes the why is going to benefit you as us as a collective. And we have
Yeah.
to understand that both things are
Yes.
true,
Yep.
because sometimes we're needing to make decisions for us collectively, and that will support you in the long run. But initially,
Yeah.
maybe that feels confusing.
Yeah.
But I think this is where there are moments, again, if you're truly about a part of a work culture, a community, you do have to take that collective stance or approach at times. And sometimes it's helping the employee understand that process, not to
Right.
detriment of them. And obviously, if you keep having a leader coming to you and being like, but it's for every like that's obviously like right, look for patterns,
Right.
but I do think it
Right.
can be helpful for a leader to differentiate that difference of like, here's how this will personally impact you or benefit
Mhm.
you, or here's how collectively this will impact us or benefit us. And so I think it's important to distinguish that and then really name who's in the room and how this information might impact them. So this is my where you might say
Mhm.
that if I was you, here's what I'd be thinking. Or I just want to
Yep.
name that for some of you, this process or policy may feel really close to home. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about how this shows up in your lived experiences or some of your identities. This is maybe where you're naming obstacles or stressors. Maybe it's saying we've had a lot of change recently. So I want to acknowledge that I'm aware of that. And here's all the ways and tools and supports that are going to support us in this process. And the last thing we would say is do you set up that kind of a meeting and space to share what you're needing from your folks to be in space with you? And so if I think
Mhm.
about all the meetings I conducted that went so sideways, like tears, yelling,
Oh,
like all
yeah.
the things, it's when I wasn't clear about what I was hoping to get from them in the context of that meeting. Because
Yeah.
sometimes it's I'm going to share something and I'd love your feedback in real time so you can tell me the gaps. Sometimes you're sharing I'd love to share something and I'd love for us to all try it for 30 days. Please keep notes and then let's come back and actually work through this.
Yep.
And of course, there's so many other variables or examples, but context there really matters. And so when they know how to show up in space with whatever the information is, it empowers them to, in that moment, oh, I know my role, so I can actually contribute and co-create here, versus just be silent or stonewall or like stare at my BFF at work, like WTF, or like whatever that like process like looks like. And so it's being really clear about how they get to participate and what you're needing from them. And they start to trust that when they see that you do that each time. They
Mhm.
really start to understand how you're asking them to show up and that you are asking them
Right.
to contribute. So then I think trust in those moments are actually built because they're like, oh, you actually care what we think. And you let us
Yeah.
know the limitations, that you let us know your limitations, and you also let us know when you can't do something and why. But it doesn't mean you discounted our feedback. And so I think it's again consistency and practice. And I think it's also knowing that you're not going to get 100% consensus and to not
Right.
confuse
Yes.
consensus
Right.
with yeah, with doing what's best for everyone.
Yeah. Well, and as you're saying this is kind of going in a different direction, but I've been thinking that part of what will need to evolve in therapy eventually is less focus on the individual one-on-one and a
Mm,
lot more focus on group. And that's like I'm hearing you help leaders train their team on collective versus individual. And I
mhm.
do think I don't think anyone would disagree with me here that like we need to fucking how to figure out how to live together again.
Yes.
And I can't remember what podcast I was listening to, but it was a political podcast, and they were sort of talking about the fact that, like, those of us on the left might look at a Trump voter and be like, we can't be in community with you, but
Mhm.
we already are.
Yeah,
And
right.
so, what are we missing in the humanity of one another? And I also, as I say this out loud, I realize I'll just name, if you're hearing this right now and you're like, but Sarah, I'm fucking pissed. I am in a space where I'm like, democracy is already over.
Mm,
That ship has sailed. All the shit is crumbling. So we have to figure out what to do next. I'm in that. This is what we do now. Or at least I'm like trying to conceptualize some things that we do next. So I want to
mhm,
acknowledge if I skipped over anyone's anger or sadness, you get to have those.
mhm.
Because I have certainly been having them. Yeah, I said a lot of words. Do you want to say anything in response?
Yeah, I'm blanking on her name, so I feel like I can't really fully give it justice without naming her correctly, but, uh, she basically just speaks on the fact that, like, her role, as a Black woman was to go into, like, the Ku Klux Klan and help people who are trying to leave actually assimilate. Do you know who I'm
Loretta
talking about? Yes, 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 uh-huh, yes.
Ross?
Yes, yes, uh-huh.
I'm literally reading that book right now, Calling
Oh,
In.
so good. Calling in,
So
yes,
good.
so
Yes.
good, and so I just think, like, when you look at people who have been doing social justice work for as long as they have, and, like, to hear their
Yes.
wisdom and to hear the
Yes.
way they speak about when has true change happened,
Yeah.
and how do you do that, and to hear the relational piece that they had to work through and, like, the way they
Right.
had to repair and the way that they had to actually meet each other, um, I feel like
Yeah.
that's really well, it's fucking hard, but it's really inspiring. Like, I think, like, I feel like when it comes to how we all have different roles, like you said, right? There's the folks who absolutely need to continue to, speak out on all the harm that's happening, and that's, like, their role, and they're really good at that. I think of we've talked about this before, offline, but the social justice map, like Deepa Iyer, right? Like when you really know what
Yeah.
your role is and how to lean into that. And I think there's some of us who, are in the like rebuilding piece and the re-envisioning, but really looking at the folks that have done that and have done a really amazing work on like how to bridge those gaps and how to be in community and relationship with each other.
Yep, damn straight. So funny, we're reading all the same books. We're, like, doing all the same shit.
I
We
love
are
that.
sisters. I love it.
Yes.
I can't wait till you see my astrology chart, and then we find
Oh,
out, like, we
yes.
have all these shared placements, I bet.
I mean, wounded healer. I mean, the fact that that's right, Chiron and the whole for those that
Mhm.
are not into astrology, that's the Chiron is an asteroid that signifies like the wounded healer, the part in your chart that shares like your wound, but also a way in which you're here to like heal or impact the world. So,
Mhm.
speaking of that tangent, and we're going to be totally like switching gears, but how fascinating is it that astrology was a huge part of psychology in its start, and how much we stripped away that to
Yep.
be right as a field more like
Scientific.
scientific. You got it.
Mhm.
Yet,
Mhm.
yet, how interesting that other disciplines like the weather or the stock market, where they're using similar methodologies as astrology, and yet that's deemed as important, which I'm not saying that
Mhm.
it's not, but just naming the like, right, when the patriarchy shows
Yep.
up and the ways that that has really impressed our worldview on like what's legitimate and what's not, and what do we take seriously and what do we not. So,
Yep.
side note.
Right?
Yeah.
Well,
I wish
speaking of
please, yeah.
I was just gonna say, speaking of Chiron, how do you feel about being a wounded healer?
Mhm. I mean, I think that it's interesting. I'm not even pausing because I don't know how to say. Normally, I'm pausing because I'm like, how do I say what with the image that's in my head into a sentence, into words? But in
Mhm.
this moment, I'm like, oh, I just feel so open to it because I don't
Mm.
know. I think that allows me to access my humanity,
Mhm.
and I wouldn't know how else to see other people's humanity if I wasn't able to like know the depth
Yeah.
of my own. So I
Yep.
feel like it's where my wisdom comes from. It's where my
Yeah.
ability to offer other people compassion comes from. Um, it's where I see how everyone's doing their best, and the ways in which oftentimes when we can't meet each other, it's because of our own shame that we carry, right? And so I think
Yep.
when I think about like what does that mean to be a wounded healer, I'm totally comfortable with those parts because I think those parts allow me to then really be able to show up with people in a way that they can actually feel seen and held, whether it's like everyday tasks like me going to the grocery store and interacting with folks, or whether it's like in the therapy room or whatnot. I think, yeah, I'm all
Mhm.
about it.
Yeah. Well, this hour has gone by faster than any hour of any other time in my
Aw.
life. I'm so sad about it.
And just
I
like that.
wish I wish we lived down the street because I would just come over and we would, like, drink some wine and eat popcorn and, like, hang out and do nerdy, witchy
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, and talk about all the things we're conceptualizing and, yeah,
Mhm.
integrating. Yeah,
Mhm.
that would be
Yeah.
amazing.
Well, where do folks find you?
Yeah, so you can find me and my co-founder Poonam at levelupleaders.org. And so there you'll kind of see our philosophy and the way we can kind of conceptualize leadership and mental health. You can also find us on Instagram at levelupleaders. And we would love to have any leadership conversation with y'all and yeah, be be a part of what we're trying to create and do differently. I
Yes,
wanted
and
to
if
say some
yeah.
cheesy slogan, but we don't have it. So I
Yeah,
guess
yeah.
I guess if you want to level up in your leadership, there we go.
Oh my God, that's so funny. Yeah, yeah. And anybody, if you've listened to this podcast for any period of time, I'm going to tell you that automatically you would vibe with this community. So please, please do check them out. Thank you. Thank you for
Thank
being in
you.
friendship with me. Thank you for showing
Yeah.
up for this today. Thank you for the work that you are doing in the world. I just treasure you, and I am so glad that that Lee put us in contact. Shout out
Yeah.
to Lee
Shout out
Matthews.
to Lee. Yeah, and ditto.
Mhm.
So happy to be in space and to be able to have conversations like this that feel really important and meaningful. And yeah, a
Amazing.
privilege. Appreciate it.
Thanks to our guest for an amazing episode. To find out more about our guests, you can visit www.headheartbiztherapy.com/podcast. You can find me at Head Heart Biz Therapy on both Facebook and Instagram. Thanks to the Jules Creative Marketing team for video editing, to Liam O'Donnell for our album art, and to Ben Mueller for our theme music. And I'm your host, Sarah Buino. Until next time, bye-bye.